The Cockatrice Boys by Joan Aiken, Chapter 8. As soon as Tom Flint had been dragged on board, the Cockatrice Bell shot off again at top speed. They were now running along the coastal plain, where the Forth narrows from firth to river. The track was in better condition here than in the hilly country they had left, and this was an advantage, as the principal adversaries in this region were slow-moving kelpies, who, unless they climbed up on the rails, had little chance of doing much damage. To prevent their invading the way ahead of the train, Major Scanty had evolved a stellar-powered ray dart, which proved an excellent deterrent. It did not kill, but shocked and winded them, so that they scrambled back off the embankment, wailing with rage and distress. "Very well, Scanty, in its way," grumbled the colonel, "but our job is to get rid of the brutes once and for all, not just give them a twinge in their backsides." "Our task, as I understand it, Colonel," said Scanty mildly, "is to proceed northwards to the neighborhood of the Kingdom of Fife at all possible speed, and there await orders as to the general conduct of the campaign." Well, yes, that's so, certainly. But what I ask myself is, supposing we get there and can't make contact with Gladiolus, then what?" During the last week, it had proved impossible to get through to Army headquarters in Leicester Square. "Only we hadn't mislaid that gal," fretted the colonel. "What a crass bit of mismanagement that was." "It certainly was," said the Archbishop, "but still I have not lost hope of picking up the trail of her abductors. We must not despair." Indeed, they did pick up the trail at Falkirk, but lost it again directly. The battle with the basilisks at Linlithgow had caused a good deal of structural damage to the train's roof and windows. The colonel decreed that repairs were to be carried out while the train was in motion. There was no time to be lost. All the crew were at work. The men were just as anxious as the officers to rescue Sana. Meanwhile, the care of Tom Flint was left to Mrs. Churt and Dyken, principally to Dyken. The injured man had been taken to a tiny cabin directly behind the engine. It was hot, noisy, and cramped. Bragg and Minch, the two men who first occupied it, had moved out and taken over the quarters of Forby and Wintlis, who had been killed in a night skirmish with trolls outside Newcastle. The cabin was so hot and airless that nobody wanted it. Dyken was in very low spirits, touchy, miserable, and forlorn. He missed Sana all the time and was desperately worried about her. What could be happening to her? Where had she been taken? Was she still alive, even? He felt very badly about not having been able to prevent her abduction. Though it was not his fault. The birds had prevented him. He felt that people who were not on the scene must blame him for not having done something more active or yelled for help sooner. He went about his duties glumly and talked to nobody, not realizing how many people felt sorry for him. And, worse than all the rest, the Gridleyan hound, Yulie, was in a state of utter dejection. Dyken had always had a notion that Yulie loved Sana best of everyone on the train. Now he was sure. The great hound crept mournfully about with ears and tail dangling so low that they swept the ground, collecting dust. He ate next to nothing, whined outside the door of Sana's cabin, and lay for hours with his chin resting on her skipping rope. Only at Haywick Peoples and Falkirk, where it was momentarily possible to pick up the scent of her abductors, did he show any signs of life or interest. He did, it was true, growl furiously when Tom Flint was brought on board at Linlithgow, and outside the door of his sick bay if he chanced to pass it. But this animosity never lasted long. He returned miserably to the galley and lay on Mrs. Church's cross stitch, getting horribly in her way. "What's the matter with that fellow Flint, anyway?" she asked, giving Dyken a cup of hot wintergreen tea for the sick man. "I never did fancy that fellow above half. Why does Dr. Wren say he mustn't be left alone? A skimpy stick of licorice and breeches he is, if you ask me, and he hasn't been bit by a basilisk or anything, has he?" "No, it's mighty queer," said Dyken. "He's not wounded, or even much bruised, but he's very weak, delirious, I think. He says his hands and feet hurt terribly, and his face, could it be frostbite? He keeps on all the time, mumbling about hands and feet and faces. I can't make head or tail of what he says, or what's really the matter with him. He say anything about where he was when he was off the train? Nothing that makes sense. Or about Sauna? After all, he went missing the same time she did. Dyken shook his head. Well, you better take him this drink while it's hot, said Mrs. Churt crossly. I can tell you I need 5 pair of hands round this galley. I wish Sauna was here, and that's a fact. Chafed and annoyed, though he could not exactly have said with whom, Dyken returned to the noisy dark cabin squashed in behind the engine. Here Tom Flint was tossing and turning on his narrow bunk. Don't leave me, he cried out wildly. Why did you leave me? Well, it wasn't for very long, snapped Dyken. He had drink this blessed stuff and stopped kicking up such a row. But Tom Flint spilled most of the wintergreen. Oh, he cried. Look at the people, with their faces all on fire. Oh, look at them, and their hands and feet burning like torches. How terrible upon the mountains are the feet of those. He kicked off the covers and stared wildly at his own feet. I think they are growing webs. I will thrust my hands and feet into the flames, he told Dyken. I wish you'd stow your gab, said Dyken. Dr. Wren came along to visit the patient. Before becoming the Archbishop, he had trained in medicine, and so had been very busy caring for all the men injured in the basilisk attack. He felt Flint's forehead and hands, and then stared into his eyes. It's odd, he doesn't have a fever, although he's so hot and restless, but just look at his eyes. What's up with him? asked Dyken. The pupils are pinpoints, as if he'd been staring at a bright light. Not in here he hasn't, said Dyken. We'll give him one of these mushroom tablets if you can get him to calm enough to swallow it. And you must stay with him. I don't want him left. Not for more than a moment or so. I'll be back as soon as I can. Why should I get saddled with this boring job? Thought Dyken resentfully, as Dr. Wren bustled off to care for his wounded men. Here, swallow this pill, will you, and stop moaning, Dyken snapped as Flint heaved himself about, and by luck, more than dexterity, managed to get it down the patient's throat. After a while, Flint calmed down a trifle. He glanced warily round the tiny room. They went off and left me, he told Dyken. They betrayed me after all their promises. Who did? Never you mind, whispered Flint. His eyes slid sideways and met those of Dyken. He smiled. Do you want to know where the girl is? He said. Do you want to know why they took her? He pulled a crumpled sheet of paper out of his pocket. They forgot I have this. Now his smile was sly, triumphant. They left me, so why should I care for them? Dyken was not at all interested in the piece of paper. He said angrily, Was it you who helped snatch Sauna? Was it? Do you know where she is? Tell me. Tom Flint was staring at the paper. If only I could read it, he muttered irritably. Here, you try. He pushed the sheet at Dyken, who gave him a cursory glance. No, I can't read it, he said shortly. It doesn't make sense. It's in some crazy writing, nothing but knots and crosses. Tell me about Sauna. Where did they take her? Up towards Crook of Devon, up toward Rumbling Bridge, whispered Flint. That's where the witches are. Oh, yes. There's always been covens in places like that, dark places, deep places, where the water comes crashing and sliding down, where the woods pull in till it's dark at midday. The girl's grandfather, he was a warlock, and her great-grandfather, too, all the way back to Grandfather Cain. I know, I've been there, too. Is that where Sauna was taken, Crook of Devon? Persisted Dyken. Who by? Where is it? You see, said Tom Flint, they need hands, human hands, to do their job. He spread out his own hands and bundled them under his armpits with a childish wail. They are burning like phosphorus. All the waters of paradise will not quench that fire. Tell me why they took Sauna, Dyken repeated. They need the girl to find the book. Human hands, cried Flint. They need hands. They can't, you see. Dig it out. He grinned maliciously. And the girl, with her gift, is as good as a truffle hound. Where is she? Sorrow, said Flint. They shall eat the bread of sorrow and burn perpetual fire. I wish you would talk sense. Did or did you not go with those men who took Sauna? How can I tell? Said Flint. After all, they may still come back to me. I daren't risk it. Risk what? Oh, cried Dakin furiously. You are hopeless. Yes, hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. With hands and feet and face of fire. The loud wail of the monster alarm echoed up and down the train. Dakin jumped up impatiently and left the cabin, slamming the door behind him. Off you go, Flint shouted after him. Don't let the sergeant forget to unwrap his lucky parcel. Surely nothing can happen to the fellow in there, thought Dakin, running into his own quarters and grabbing his goggles and electric crossbow. He had no idea what Flint's last remark could have meant. Just rubbish, most probably. But when the alert was over, it proved to have been a mistaken warning, a group of red deer crossing the track, and Dakin returned to the cabin. Tom Flint seemed to have undergone a surprising change. His cheeks were plumper. He was a better color. He talked more sensibly. If he were a balloon, thought Dakin, I'd say somebody had blown him up. You see, the ozone layer was punctured, he suddenly remarked confidently to Dakin. That's how all the monsters got in. It happens easily during the sleep of reason. Oh? Said Dakin, neither understanding nor believing him. Who punctured it, then? Fumes, heat, all the products of a more comfortable life, but of course my friends were lightning quick to take advantage of the situation. Flint spoke proudly like the managing director of a company, giving a successful annual report. They slipped the monsters through. But why? From where? Oh, somewhere else. Why? Dakin asked again. To produce maximum chaos in order to take over the globe. This is the weakest point, so this is where they began. Naturally, disintegration of the human ethos. It's like... Tom Flint's eyes wandered round the stuffy little cabin. For a moment, disconcertingly, the irises disappeared clean out of sight, leaving only the whites. It's like growing a bacterial culture, he said then, his eyes returning to normal. You need some really dirty, scummy water, nourishment for the new organism you want to grow. What organism? Dakin yawned. He was bored. The little cabin had no windows. He wished he could walk along the corridor and see where the train had got to. My friends, the adversaries. Adversaries of what? Honor, order, respect of law. What my friends really want is to get a hold of Scott's book, the Book of Power, for their task must be done by human hands, he repeated. And this is where you can help them. Dakin yawned again. He did not want to help anybody. He was fed up with standing on the sidelines being helpful. What he wanted was glory, to be in battle again. Rattling his drum, feeling important and powerful, part of it all, he remembered the terrific excitement of the battle at Manchester. Lost in recall, he paid little heed to the voice of Tom Flint, who was waffling on about this old book that had been lodged in a hermit's cell hundreds of years ago. Sorrow? Not in the sense of grief you understand, but from the old word soren, meaning a service of hospitality to a clan chieftain. Oh, blow you and your sorrows, thought Dakin, wishing there might be another Kelpie warning. Kelpies were slow beasts. They didn't provide the mad excitement of basilisks, or the terror of trolls or griffins. But anything would be better than being obliged to sit here and listen to this interminable, dreary rubbish about abbeys and caves and glens. What was your favorite food when you were small? Tom Flint unexpectedly asked. Oh, Dakin started, I suppose Polly Lollies. Oh, I could have eaten hundreds of them when I was a kid. Gorgeously colored they were, came in little string sacks. Suppose you had 100 tons of them now. Yuck. Well, what would you like best in the world now? A helibike? What would be the good? Too many monsters about. He had longed for one, though. Only the sons of millionaires could afford them, or gangsters. Well, then, the insidious voice kept pressing. What would you really, really like best? Just playing on my drum, Aiken croaked. In a battle, that's what I like best. Ah, the alarm sounded again. Aiken dashed gladly to the door. We shall see what we can do, Tom Flint called after him. Don't forget the book. Don't forget it. It will be wrapped in cloth of copper, pinned with a gold pin. It would be best if you found it before your cousin Sana does. Otherwise, the glory will be hers, of course, not yours. Oh, be quiet, Aiken thought. I'm not listening, and he ran on, even when a curious shriek sounded from the cabin behind him. A shriek of pain, or was it joy? The train had come to a halt because the lights of Aloha were visible across the estuary. But there were kelpies ahead, ensconced in large numbers on the viaduct. After the long, arduous, and tiresome battle which followed, no drum work was required, only dogged bashing and close combat with electric rays. Aiken was hurt and suffered from a sharp sense of injustice when the colonel, spotting him, sharply ordered him to get back in Flint's cabin on the double. You should not have left it. Why did you do so? You were not supposed to quit your watch. The Archbishop was most emphatic that he should not be left alone. But I wanted to help fight the Kelpies, sir. Aiken was injured and virtuous. It was battle stations. There were enough men for that without you. Return to your post at once. And disastrously, when Aiken got back to his cabin, Tom Flint was not there. Perhaps he jumped off the observation platform, suggested Major Scanty. Impossible, declared the colonel. I was there all the time. It is extremely vexatious. What do you think can have happened to him, Archbishop? I am afraid his friends may have come back for him. And who's been rummaging in my bunk? Demanded Sergeant Bellswinger furiously. Somebody after your secret parcel, Sergeant, teased Ensign Pomfret. Everybody knew that ever since the train left Manchester, the sergeant had a mysterious flat package done up in snark-proof, waterproof paper, which he tucked into his battle blouse before every engagement. No one had asked what it was. Many had guessed. Ah, no, that's safe enough, the sergeant tapped his diaphragm. But I'd like to know what so-and-so's been fossicking in my berth. I bet it was that mealy-mouthed supercargo. Everyone else was out fighting except for Mrs. Churt, and I'm sure it wasn't her. Aiken was in slight disgrace. And that's the end of Chapter 8.